outsider.
Outsider.
2015 was the year of the outsider, and a year when words actually did speak far louder than actions.
There was a dramatic presidential election where a political outsider who promised to shake up Washington defeated an establishment candidate. Now let me ask you, which candidate came to mind? Was it Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again rhetoric, or was it the hope and change slogans of Barack Obama? For the last 31 years of presidential politics, the United States has been defined by political outsiders. People who coded themselves as not your typical politician, everyone except for our current president, that is. While they're not outsiders to the same degree as Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama were all perceived as political outsiders at the time of their respective elections. Every candidate who won the presidency from Clinton to Trump beat another candidate with more political experience. Except when they were up for re-election, but I'm not really going to count that because of incumbency bias. Joe Biden is the first winning candidate in 3 decades to run primarily on his experience rather than being a Washington outsider. In fact, Joe Biden had been in Washington for 45 years prior to becoming president of the United States, the most out of any president in American history.
If he stays in the Senate till the end of this century, he'll be 57, the average age of senators now.
How did we go from a long stream of anti-establishment candidates back to a traditional politician? And what does that say about our modern day politics? To better understand this phenomenon, we're going to go way back to the presidency of George H.W. Bush. Bush was the last of a dying breed, a country club Republican who was less affiliated with the evangelical wing of the party and a little more moderate. Ronald Reagan's famous trickle-down economics policy might be the standard of the Republican Party to this day, but while George Bush was running against him in the primaries, he famously mocked it.
What I'm saying is that this type of what I call a voodoo economic policy, it just isn't going to work.
Last night, Vice President Bush was asked about that and corrected the record.
Well, what I said back then, it's very hard to find actually, let me start over. One, I didn't say it. Nobody, every network's looked for it and none can find it. It was never said.
Bush's predecessors, Reagan and Carter, were both also fairly outsider-coded, which further contributed to his perception as a sort of old-school politician.
I know you and I share a lot of worries about the future of our state and nation.
Much like Joe Biden, George Bush was one of the most politically experienced presidents that this country has ever seen. He had served as a congressman, special envoy to China, CIA director, and vice president, all before being elected to the nation's highest office.
George Bush, effective leadership, appointed CIA chief, revitalized the agency during its toughest time, rebuilt our intelligence capability, headed regulatory reform, cut government red tape, saving billions, and sped new life-saving drugs to the marketplace, represented the president in 74 countries, knew all of the last 4 Soviet leaders, led the fight for the INF Treaty, faced down armed commandants in El Salvador on human rights. George Bush, tough, tested, presidential leadership.
Similar to Biden, Bush was seen as a fairly boring old guy, a sort of traditional politician who was competent but not particularly exciting. This is where it becomes necessary to understand the pendulum theory, which when applied to presidential politics basically means that the American people tend to elect candidates who are diametrically opposed to the previous ones in some way. The year is 1992 and regular old George Bush is running for re-election. In walks Bill Clinton, the young, charismatic governor of a small state far away from the political machine that is Washington, D.C.
It was in 1963 that I went to Washington and met President Kennedy at the Boys Nation program. And I remember just thinking what an incredible country this was, that somebody like me, had no money or anything, would be given the opportunity to meet the president.
While Clinton may not have been a complete outsider per se, he was definitely one when compared to President Bush. We might think of Bush and Clinton as just 2 old guys, but it's important to see things from Bush's perspective. Clinton was his son's age, and here he was trying to take his job. Bush and Clinton weren't just complete opposites in terms of political background, but also in terms of personality and presentation. Clinton showed up out of nowhere and was cool in a way that politicians before him just weren't. He's a tried and true member of the 60s generation, and he's got the pics to prove it. In my opinion, there's two sides to politics: policy and presentation. The use of rhetoric versus actual governance. In theory, an effective politician should be able to do both. Make a substantial change in the lives of their constituency while effectively delivering an impactful message. Think of FDR's fireside chats combined with his numerous government programs to combat the Great Depression. Regardless of whether or not they were effective, Roosevelt was able to amass popular support and unprecedented electoral victories through a combination of rhetoric and governance. Ronald Reagan had been an actor prior to entering politics, and he sure had the charisma and charm to back it up. Something that his VP, a true creature of Washington, certainly did not.
We're reminded of the many traditions of openness and democracy that have marked the history of this city. America missed me.
Take a look at this 1988 magazine cover discussing the wimp factor. This seems incredibly tame by today's standards, but I want you to think about it in the context of the era of wholesome American politics and mourning in America.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history.
You can clearly see the so-called wimp factor portrayed in every single political cartoon of the man. Despite this, Bush won a pretty decisive victory in 1988, and most people would have assumed that he was going to cruise to re-election, but 1992 took an unexpected turn. Bush wasn't just dealing with one outsider candidate, but two, as billionaire Ross Perot decided to run a third-party candidacy through the Reform Party.
Look at all three candidates and then vote your conscience.
Ross Perot for president.
While Perot didn't win any electoral votes, he achieved a pretty impressive showing for a third-party candidacy. He was an incredibly interesting candidate, as his protectionist policies and populist rhetoric were indicative of a hunger for something different among the American people.
These guys want to make this kind of money. They ought to be TV anchormen, basketball players, rock stars. But running a company, look, these fellows have their heads straight here. They're getting appropriate income, but not rock star income.
While Perot may not have won, his campaign had a strong long-term influence as it provided a template for the campaign of future President Donald Trump, who even considered running for the Reform Party nomination himself in the year 2000. Many people were shocked by Trump's rise in American politics, but you can see the seeds planted for it all the way back in 1992.
President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Sounds good.
Trump decided not to run then, citing issues with the Reform Party.
I'm not going to be running. The party is, as you know, self-destructing.
Of course, Clinton would go on to beat Bush, but he did so without winning the popular vote, only winning a plurality. If I had to illustrate the difference between Bush and Clinton in just one interaction, I would probably bring up the watch incident. The thing to understand about Bill Clinton is whether you love him or hate him, the guy is a charisma factory.
What's your name?
My name's Kyle Demers.
How old are you?
8. How does it feel like to be president?
I don't know, I haven't won yet, but I hope it'll feel good.
He's the ultimate people person, which is an incredible talent for a politician, especially in a town hall debate where you're going to be asked questions directly by the voters. I gotta hand it to Bush. Going up against Clinton in a town hall debate is pretty brave, but let's see how he handles it.
How has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally.
On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think that think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. Maybe I won't get it wrong. Are you suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
This is hard to watch. This nice lady is asking a genuine question to see how human the candidates are, and Bush comes in and he's like, "Well, it has to do with interest rates." And then he gets all frustrated when she presses him on the question. But the icing on the cake is in the very beginning of the clip. As soon as the voter starts talking, Bush goes and glances at his watch. There's small things in somebody's demeanor that can be pretty off-putting, just little things somebody does that shows you that they're not really listening. Now, looking at your watch while someone is talking, that's a pretty big one. You might be asking, how did Clinton handle the question?
Tell me how it's affected you again. You know people who've lost their jobs
yeah.
and lost their homes? Well, I've been governor of a small state for 12 years. I'll tell you how it's affected me. Every year, Congress and the President sign laws that make us do more things and gives us less money to do it with. I see people in my state, middle-class people, their taxes have gone up in Washington and their services have gone down, while the wealthy have gotten tax cuts. I have seen what's happened in this last 4 years when, in my state, when people lose their jobs, there's a good chance I'll know them by their names. When a factory closes, I know the people who ran it. When the businesses go bankrupt, I know them.
Before giving any sort of answer to the question, Clinton makes an effort to connect with the voter and empathize with her.
What do President Clinton, conservative radio personality Rush Limbaugh, and rock star Billy Idol have in common? They've all got electronic mail addresses on computer systems linked to the internet.
In the age of TV and the internet, a politician's rhetoric is more important than ever, and that means always being on your A game. A slip-up like Bush's can change the hearts and minds of millions, whether it's fair or not. People don't want a politician. Politician has become a bad word. They want somebody they can trust. Hence, the winner of the 1992 presidential election, one Mr. William Jefferson Clinton. It's widely believed that the candidacy of Ross Perot drew more votes away from the Bush campaign, and that Bush would have likely been reelected if it hadn't been for the third-party presence, burned by not one but two political outsiders. Unfortunate. Here was Bill Clinton in all his faults and glory, a political outsider that was finally here to shake up the game. And did he? Clinton was a perfect representation of America in the 1990s. He played the saxophone and ate McDonald's. He was famous for overindulging in food and other things. While this was certainly fitting for the time period, it got to the point where America wanted somebody a little more disciplined. The fundamental problem with an outsider coming to power is that they become the establishment, and suddenly we're back to square one. Clinton may have been a charming outsider, but he got caught lying about an affair, which made him look like a stereotypical lying politician.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
A few moments later.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong.
The American people wanted someone more disciplined and honest.
I believe we need to encourage personal responsibility so people are accountable for their actions.
Remember, folks, this is before the Iraq War. George W. Bush had been an alcoholic earlier in his life, and through discipline and force of will was able to overcome that and get his life back on track. This is in stark contrast to the overindulgent Clinton. Combined with a fairly wooden Democratic nominee who just happened to be Clinton's vice president during the years of personal scandal, the election came down to one question. Who would you rather have a beer with? You might be saying George Bush can't be a political outsider, his dad was literally president, which is a fair point. But despite coming from a political dynasty, Bush had much more of a background in business than he ever did in politics, which contributed to his outsider image.
But you're right, being a George Bush in this day and age has got some unusual traits to it.
By most accounts, it seems as though the Bush clan expected more of a political future from Jeb, and we all know how great that went.
Said if you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, would you? I need to know. And crazy. Hell yeah, I would.
Bush Jr. was very different from his father and was often considered the black sheep of his own family. While his dad was seen as wimpy, Jr. was known as a party kid who turned his life around and became a born-again Christian. The Reagan Revolution changed the Republican Party forever and set apart the more moderate Republicans, such as the old man Bush. Lucky for Jr., his politics were made much more in the image of Reagan than his own father's. Reaganomics with the religious rhetoric to back it up. At the time, the governor of Texas had never worked in Washington and seemed like just a regular guy for the most part.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Once again, the man who won the election was the more outsider-coded of the two, despite not winning the popular vote. Al Gore may have been a senator and vice president, but George Bush had the vibes. Barack Obama's presidential campaign is one of the most incredible examples of branding that I've ever seen. This man was able to make himself synonymous with platitudes like hope and change. You might be saying, but Andre, McCain was at a disadvantage and whoever the Democrats nominated was probably going to win. That's a fair point, and that's why we're going to look at the 2008 Democratic presidential primary between Senators Obama and Clinton. This primary was going to be one of progress no matter what. It was either going to be the first black man or the first woman. I would argue that these identity factors for both candidates more or less cancel each other out, which allows us to take a better look at each candidate's perception. Like I mentioned earlier, the Clintons were once political outsiders themselves, but that time had passed. After 8 years of Bill in the White House, where Hillary was a close advisor to the president and her own career as a senator, any outsider image they might have had was gone. A lot of people on the right like to refer to Obama as a community organizer back in the day to make him seem less experienced. This seems pretty unnecessary once you realize Obama's first political office was the United States Senate, which he didn't even serve a full term in before becoming president of the United States. Both in the primary and in the general, political experience was on the ballot, and the electorate rejected it. Obama didn't win despite his lack of political experience, he won because of it.
So, I've watched the politicians, I've dealt with them all my life. If you can't make a good deal with a politician, then there's something wrong with you. You're certainly not very good. And that's what we have representing us. They will never make America great again. They don't even have a chance.
Donald J. Trump is the only president ever elected with no military or government experience. If Clinton, Bush, and Obama weren't outsider enough, then Trump was certainly going to be. In an era of hyper-partisan politics, Donald Trump rises above it to be even more of a divisive figure. A lot of voters were attracted to Trump's tell-it-like-it-is style, where he wasn't afraid to say what he really means.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
At times, he could be rude or brash in a way that we haven't really seen from a politician before, not publicly at least.
Last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television as I did. Yeah. To see those monkeys from those African countries. Damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
Trump never tried to talk like a politician or change who he was. Other Republican figures like George Bush, Mitt Romney, and Ted Cruz were all fighting for the party of Reagan, but 45 managed to turn it into the party of Trump. The reasons that people love Trump are the same reasons why people hate him. The Donald has always been a headline machine. While him and the media hate each other, they certainly need each other. You really could not get away from Trump news during his presidency. While other presidents certainly faced what we can call over-coverage, everything that Trump did was a news story, and American voters seemed kind of tired of it.
Well, that's embarrassing. What's that stuck to President Trump's shoe as he boards Air Force One?
During the 2016 Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton found herself once again running against a political outsider, hope and change style candidate. 2016 was a true populist moment. People were fed up and they wanted something different.
We are going to do something so good and so fast and so strong, and the world is going to respect us again.
The wealthiest people and largest corporations in this country will start paying their fair share of taxes.
While clearly very different on most issues, both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders were anti-establishment candidates that embodied this sort of energy. Both candidates criticized the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, that was signed into law by Bill Clinton in 1993. I would argue that Trump's position on NAFTA is a big part of why he beat Clinton in 2016. I even dare say that I think Sanders would have probably beat Trump in the 2016 election just because he sort of met the mood of the country more than Secretary Clinton did, but that's easy to say with hindsight. Sorry, Hillary, I guess political insiders just don't win elections anymore.
CNN projects Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is the complete opposite of a political outsider. The Washington veteran became a United States Senator during the Nixon administration, so you could say he's been around for a while.
34-year-old Senator Joseph Biden of Delaware believes the debates between Carter and President Ford starting next Thursday could determine to a great extent the outcome of the presidential election.
Joe Biden's pretty boring, but after 4 years of nonstop Trump news, I guess boring is what the American American people wanted. In my opinion, this is a big reason why Sanders lost to Biden in 2020. Americans weren't looking for the same change candidate that they wanted in 2016. Instead, they just wanted a reliable old face that would steer the ship. The initial idea for this video came from similarities that I saw between Biden and Bush Sr. They're both longtime Washington insiders, relics of a bygone era who managed to come to power after there's been a clear change in direction of their political party.
I would not recommend that anyone pick me for vice president.
George Bush wasn't exactly the best successor to carry the torch of Reaganism, and I find it hard to believe that Obama really saw Biden as his successor, especially since his chosen successor lost an election.
Thank you. Vice President Biden, Vice President. That was a joke.
I guess my main point in this video is to just highlight that just having somebody who is perceived as a political outsider doesn't really do much. I don't think most people would argue with the last 30 years of American politics not being particularly great. Where the Republican and Democratic parties are going in the future is hard to tell, but it's interesting to wonder whether or not the Republicans are going to keep going down the sort of line of Trumpism, and if the Democrats are going to stick to the establishment from now on, or if they're going to embrace more outsider candidates once again going forward. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing because it really does make a big difference for a smaller channel like myself. You can also support me on Patreon or even just send a video to a friend because it really would mean a lot. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Andre Dutra and I'll see you soon.